We actually have two of these sessions because there are some big differences. The first session is specific to the enterprise side. So this is the enterprise, or if you would, employee and related non-employee facing aspect of an assessment blueprint roadmap process, and we'll get into some of the details. If you're also interested, the one that's at 3, so after a 10-minute break, is very specific to the consumer side. Consumer IAM, or as you'll see it referred to in various different formats, which you'll hear customer IAM, which is a facet of it, in my humble opinion, and we'll go into the details on that as well. But that will be in that next session. Anyways, if you stay for both, you're going to be completely sick of me by the end. All right. So we're going to get into this. I know we have about 50 minutes. We'll leave some time for some question and answers as well. What we're going to show you is a practice that we utilize for building out what is essentially a 3-step getting your ducks in a row, I like to call it, methodology. The rationale being that if you go and you buy the software and you haven't done prep processes, you're gonna hit a brick wall. It's not 100% certain of that, but we've gone into a lot of organizations where you have that problem of no actual real requirements or use cases or workflows to work with. We want to avoid that. So we're going to get into that detail, but I should probably go into the intro side. So first, hi everybody, I'm Todd. I'm a co-founder and co-CEO, as well as chief strategist for IDMWORKS. We're not here to do the hard sell or anything like that. We do have one slide I'm going to try to keep to under a minute or less, I promise, because I'm not the sales guy anyways. So let's talk about this. Just real quick so you understand who we are. We've been around since 2004. We actually got about 150 plus folks, and we're everything from the service perspective. We have MSP, developments and products, etc. You can talk to us or come by our booth at any point in time. It's real easy to find. We got a guy screaming at the top of his lungs, IDMWORKS, and he's in the kabuki makeup dressed as Gene Simmons. Or maybe it is really Gene Simmons. We'll let you figure out. And we're going to leave it at that because, again, it's as far as we need to go on that. All right, so let's talk about 3 minutes. It's coming. 2 more minutes, you're all going to join me. All right, so let's talk about them starting from an IAM maturity model perspective. Why do organizations run a process like this? And of course, I'll get into the weeds on the process itself, but why would you want to run this type of process? So thank you guys very much. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you later at the booth. All right, thank you. Thank you. You didn't fall for it? All right. Thank you, guys. I could have done it again. We'll see. Anyways, a couple quick points here. So this is a PowerPoint version, and I'm not certain if they send out the PDFs or not at the end of this. However, if you would like this, and we actually have some updates and some of the other accoutrement that we have, all you got to do is shoot me an email, and I will get them out to you. Do not do it over LinkedIn. You can link into me, but if you ever tried figuring that out to get a document out, it gets a little difficult. But it's super easy, todd@idmworks.com, or alternatively, it will be on the last slide. And I have a business card, so it's not like you can't just come up at the end or come to the booth or whatever. Grab a business card, and what I'll do is make sure that these get out there. You shoot me a message, and we'll shoot them out likely over the weekend. All right. Having said that, let's talk about this IAM maturity model. Okay. So, a lot of organizations, I know it's going to be hard to read from that side, and when people take pictures, I kind of do this a lot of the time, so I'm just throwing that out there anyways, because it's fun. The enterprise maturity model. Now, interestingly enough, this doesn't change all that much when we talk about the consumer one, and there'll be some aspects of that, but here's the thing to understand. A lot of orgs, they run into the headache of lack of governance. And governance gets thrown around there. Not everybody always knows what that means. But when we talk about a governance model here, we're talking about a true methodology utilized to track, maintain, and make proper decisions, as well as communications, in terms of this ongoing process, whether it's an overtime program and treating it as a program, or you're at the operations side of things, and you're going to have to continuously do updates. and expand. So we're going to get into a little more on what we mean and get a little deeper in the weeds from the governance perspective. But the point being this, a lot of organizations, they have this problem. This group over here, they needed, pick your poison, let's say an SSO tool. We'll go a little older here on this. They bought one, right? Group number 2, they needed one, they bought one. Now the enterprise is looking, and what's the problem? Well, there's already 2 other ones. We're looking at a 3rd one. So when we go to this piecemeal basis that goes on, we always run into the headache of multiple products, they do the same things, nobody gave it any real thought, and then operations, oh man, they want to kill you because there's nothing worse than calling up operations and being like, hey, so I just bought this tool, or I didn't just buy it, we just put the tool in. Oh, when's it go to production? Yesterday. Okay, and what do you want from us? Well, it's your problem now. Yeah, I love when people laugh because it means it's true, right? You're having that problem. That's always the worst headache because then we get into murder mode. Somebody wants to murder somebody. We want to avoid that. All right. The other aspect of this, we talked about the redundancy basically. We talked about the fact that it lessens the overall value when we have more of a tactical approach to this. So the other aspect to say is, okay, well, great, how are we going to fix it? How are we going to improve that? We're going to go into some methodologies in order to get you there, but also I want to talk about, again, to go back to our friend, the governance model. First and foremost, let's talk about this in terms of how we're going to build a program. If you're treating any of these aspects of identity and access management as just a project, you run into a couple of headaches. I'm putting the SSO tool. Well, how is that governed or affected by, you name it, auto provisioning, federation? What's the integration if you have privileged account management? We can keep going on with this. How about from a directory management standpoint, which is a big driver of this? What are the bits and pieces? And there's always a lot of interplay between them. So if we're not taking all of that into account, and we're not looking at this from more of a programmatic point of view, both with what's in operations, but also how this applies with other projects, what ends up happening is our projects have a higher chance of failure. So we're going to go into a little more detail on that shortly. All right. So the goal of this is to build a set of deliverables within your organization that you can run with, a governance model, requirements, use cases, costing, budgeting, all that fun stuff. And you do all of that, hopefully, before you go down the product aspect of things. Now, I'm not sure how many product vendors in here, they always get ticked off when I say this. Do not buy their product. Don't buy it. They always get mad when I say that. Run a process to understand what you need to buy first. What is your requirement? Don't buy a product and then try to figure out how your eventual requirements fit it. Figure out your requirements, find out if the product does. Right? It seems so easy. It's like buy low, sell high, the thing nobody ever does, right? So that's the problem there, and that's what we're trying to get around. And in order to do this, we take this from an enterprise approach, build an agreed-upon enterprise architecture. We then can build out programmatically any projects that need to occur within it. We can budget this thing out. We have a model. We've defined it, level 3. Level 4, now we can run with it. We say, great, let's run these projects now. Let's do it in an order that works for us, makes sense. If you're more, not that there's too many of them out there, if you're more of a waterfall model, fit it into a waterfall model. If you're an agile model, fine. DevOps, depending on what you're doing, is a little tricky. It depends. Don't assume you can hammer everything into DevOps. Anyways, get all this defined. Everybody's agreed upon. We're going to talk about a couple things that are a little bit of a CYA approach because if we do this properly, you don't have the headache, hopefully, of somebody saying, that's not what I wanted after it's in, or, hey, it only did 10% of the functionality we wanted. And then heads start to roll. What happens here when you do that, right? You're putting you make the selection of the product, you put it in, and it fails. Your integration fails. What's the first thing you do? You blame your integrator. Oh, they suck, let's get another one. Or you blame the software vendor. Oh, they suck. Let's get another one. So you run it again. You fail if you haven't done a proper process. At some point, it's your heads that roll because people realize that no, it's not your integrator, it's not your vendor, it was you, right? And that's the problem we want to avoid. All right, so even once we get our ducks in a row, we get to this level 5 wonderful optimized process, we want to make sure that we don't stay there, because let's talk about this for a second, right? 3 years ago, half the stuff you're seeing at this show, maybe more, did it even exist? It might have. Were you even thinking about it, looking at it? Everything, not just in IAM, but really in IT security, has a metric shift, has a huge shift every 36 months, all right? Even cloud and all the security side in the cloud. So if you go 2 cycles back, about 6 years ago, people were just talking about it. People were not shifting from a security perspective into the cloud. And even 3 years ago, when people started talking blockchain, and most of them still don't do much with it, but there was that shift where 6 years ago you didn't see it. And now you're seeing a lot in terms really around data and changes to data management more than anything, and how that applies within this. Now, that 3 years ago wasn't really being talked about up to this level of detail. Part of it is because regulations. So every 3 years. So if you don't redo this process in some form or update it at least every 3 years, you're not going to get very far. You'll get a couple of years if you're lucky out of it, and then it's going to stagnate. I don't like 5-year roadmaps in this because you might as well just burn the last 2 years. All right, I'm going to keep going. So let's talk about what we're covering when we talk about enterprise IAM. Some people have ever seen this one before. If you've seen one of my webinars or whatnot, you'll hopefully recognize this. We call this the jellyfish. Yeah, I know it doesn't look like a jellyfish. I get that. It looks like a circle. But when you look at a jellyfish from the top down, what do you end up seeing? It looks like a big billowy circle type. And these are the core functionalities from the enterprise perspective. So first you've got administration. That's our identities and our entitlements around those. So when we talk about identities, well, that's an ever-changing thing in a lot of organizations. Hopefully we don't just think it's human beings. Yes, we have employees. Yes, we have contractors, consultants, vendors, interns, temp workers, so on and so forth. But we also have the non-human identities, right? On the consumer side, by the way, we have customers and others similar. But we have non-identities. Non-identities such as, well, I'm doing a little later today, bots. I'm doing an RPA presentation. There's great non-human identity. Systems, service accounts, and the like. And even ones that are considered shared, or you may not, but may be considered shared accounts. So I got 200 people with domain admin access, but really only 10 ever needed at a time. So we don't create 10 domain admins and make them check it in, check it out, for example. Those become non-human, but they're shared accounts, and then people check them out. There's an example, so to speak, of the utilization of non-human accounts, but they have identities, in a sense, behind them. And at a minimum, owners, and those become part of the identity. So then we get into the second piece, access, which is really 2 things, auth and auth-z. How do I get in? Once I'm in, what am I allowed to do? Right? We have to get into that. Too many organizations, they stop at authentication. I get in, and I can do whatever I want to do. Well, that's not so good. So we're going to talk about that. And then we got intelligence, and this is a fun one. Because that used to just simply be reporting and logging, and every once in a while somebody get an alert of something, nobody would do anything with it. Now we want to be able to say, from an intelligence point of view, what can we do? What can we collect? Can we use AI? Here's the only headache with that one is, as you probably see out there, this is an up-and-coming field. There's still more and more coming out, and it's a little difficult to be able to figure out, to separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were, because it's still up and coming. And when you get a lot of these technologies as they're progressing and growing, and the M&A activity, it's a little difficult to, from a maturity perspective, to get the right vendor. So it's something to keep an eye on because it shifts very quickly. All right, so the end state goal of this is simply we want to make sure the right people are getting the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And we have to be able to prove it. And if we can't prove it, we got a problem. I actually tell my folks internally in the organization, they'll say, oh, so-and-so said X when we ask them why this decision was made. They say, great, where? Show me the email, show me the message. No, it was on the phone. Well, then it did not exist. Because guess what? From an audit perspective, if it's not provable, it doesn't exist. Okay. Well, we're going to take our jellyfish, and I'm going to show you why it's a jellyfish. We flip it. See those same core 4? You got your intelligence, your administration, you got authentication, you got authorization. And these subcategories you see within it. One, it's not everything. Two, there's crossover there. So don't assume one is only in intelligence or one is only in administration and so on. There's crossover. The point being, though, is we have to look at this again from a programmatic point of view, because we got a lot to deal with. On the top and bottom, you see you got SIM, you got the data access management and governance side of things. And in between, you got a whole host of things, right? Segregation of duties, the role management, the resource management. So you may have auto provisioning, whether it's Microsoft resources. It may include Unix, Linux, all that fun stuff, mainframe. This isn't everything on the list, obviously. Where are the data stores themselves, right? That's ever changing. You know, we have a lot of orgs, we got AD and then we got Azure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's all of our data stores. Where does our identity data live? How are we dealing with it? And also the threat prevention and detection behind it. All right, so next up as we continue and we get to some more of the auth N and auth Z side, how do we know the person at the other end is who they say they are? You got your proofing aspect. And then you got all the fun parts about authentication. Yeah, you'll always hear death of the password and all that fun stuff. And yes, it's not that we disagree with that, because passwords are really not the best methodology, obviously. But what are the other factors that we're using? Are they adaptive in nature? Because you may have some very basic ones. You have to know when you need to ask for more, or ask again, or ask new questions, so to speak. So what are our methodologies behind that? All right, so then we keep going and we expand, right? So obviously we have our friend single sign-on. To go beyond it, we talked about multi-factor. We get to a big version of single sign-on with a little bit of provisioning on it, aka federation. And now we get into the key to the kingdom accounts. So your privileged account management, we got a lot to cover here. And again, this isn't even all of it. Different access control models, et cetera. So we got a lot to deal with when we're talking about this. So when we're doing this process, we want to make sure we cover everything. Some of it may be a checkbox, as simple as, we don't need it. It got nothing to do with this. But if we're not making sure to cover these aspects, we do ourselves a disservice. All right, so before we get into the approach that we utilize and think you should utilize. And again, my best practices may not be your best practices or yours, so I don't like the best practice terminology. I can tell you that this has worked for us. We've seen a much higher success rate out there. Failed projects have not really been an issue. Whereas prior to this, back in the day, yeah, I could tell you there was failed projects going back a decade easily. And when we see an org that doesn't follow a process like this, we see a much higher failure rate. So we're going to get into that. Let's talk about a few things. So first of all, do we have any CISOs here in the room? Wow. I don't get to make fun of them for this one. Who knows what CISO stands for? Go ahead. Chief Information Security Officer. Wow. I'm sorry. Now I get to pick on you for the rest of the time. Career is soon over. Career is soon over. So here's the problem. Average lifespan of CISOs. What's that?
That's why they're not here.
That's why they're not here. Exactly. Yeah? So we liken the CISO to the Secret Service guy. And I guess we're in the perfect place to discuss that, right? So that's the guy, who's behind him? The president, or to make it more apropos to us, the president and CEO, as well as other C-levels, and he's there to take the bullet. As horrible as that is and morbid. He's got the little thing that goes to the ear, and that's the CISO's job, right? But if that guy doesn't have armor, he's a sitting duck, right? He's okay, and he goes down. And that's why you have a short lifespan of the CISO community. I think the average that I read, and I haven't read in a long time, is about 2 years. Of course, we're talking about averages and statistics and all that stuff. And I hear that something like 87.9% of them are completely made up. So, all right. So we want to talk about this process. All right. 3 stages. And I promise the camera people, you can have a copy of this, I promise. All right, 3 stages, at least this is 3 stages that we utilize. We highly recommend you do. We're always open to hear if you have other suggestions in this regard. We like to change this as things change because we want to stay on top of things. But we take typically a three-stage approach. First, the actual assessment aspect of this. And it's basically this. Stakeholder calls you in, or director of IAM, or whatever it may be. They call you in, and they say, here's what I want, and here's what I need. And that's great. But you have to do a bit of a hybrid approach. You have to talk to the people on the ground doing the work today to get beyond that and say, okay, that's great, but what are the gaps? What are the issues? What's, as I like to say, killing you today or makes you want to kill, right? And in order to do that, you do need to talk to more than just the stakeholders. The goal being, find out what are the true issues in the org. So the want and the need may be, hey, I want, I don't know, a CASB solution. And I think I skipped over that actually in the jellyfish. It just reminded me. That's great. That's a want. What's the why behind it? Do they have a good rationale? Or is it something they know they need for some reason, right? Well, that's great. Well, now we talk to folks on the ground and they say, hey, listen, I got 7 accounts I have to manage with 7 different passwords. And they don't change all at the same time. So what I do is I change them all at the same time, even though I'm only allowed to use the last 10. So I just change it 10 times in a row, and I never have to technically change my password, which is fine because passwords are horrible anyways, right? All right. Now we found a pretty big issue, a gap in the process as well. The other is if right now I go A, then B, then C, and I jump down to N, and I come back up to E, I got a broken process. Remember our friend people process technology that everybody talks about? Anytime anybody brings that up, say, what do you mean by that? See what they say. Here's our version. I think I just told you about a broken process issue. I go A, B, C, what do I say? Drop down to N, come back up to E, so I'm skipping D altogether. We know we got a broken process. Well, let's talk about a people problem. So Steve is asterisk. What is asterisk? It's only in his head. Sean is double asterisk. It's only in his head. Steve leaves the organization because he gets fed up one day, takes that knowledge with him. Or doesn't, just leaves the organization because he won Powerball, and it leaves the organization. Well, we got a people problem there. And it ties also back to process if those aren't well documented. People process. Now, you don't always see data within this because bad data persists out there, and that is also an aspect of this. And it kind of spans the both. And the reason I bring that up is when we get to technology, if we haven't fixed those 2 items, at least the data will say at a minimum and the process at a minimum, all the technology in the world is only going to give us a fast version of crappy process and lousy data. And that's the headache in this. We want to avoid that, which is why I started this thing off saying, don't buy any of these guys' software. Because if you haven't fixed those items, you get to the technology, and if you put the technology first, you're going to fail. Or you're going to get a lesser value. We had an organization that moved everything into an automated tool for provisioning. But they didn't do this process. And it was one of the greatest stories I ever heard. They had reached out to us to give them a hand because what they said was, we did everything manually before, and it was a headache, and we were told, go buy technology and fix this. They put the technology in, they didn't do any process before it, and the problem was it was taking people 4 weeks to get access to everything they needed to do their job. They put the automated tool, and it was now taking 8. Yeah, a lot of problems. All right, so we know the problems. How do we fix this? So in order to fix this, we have to understand, first, what does this mean to the organization? I can say, oh, I changed my passwords. Like I said, this process I gave you, I have 7 different accounts. Go in a little more excruciating detail. Not all orgs like to see that, and I get that, but there's a lot of value in it because, oh, that's all right. So that she did that because I made fun of the CISO thing. All right. You and me after class. All right. I'm sure she'll kill me. So we want to build this out into detail because once we understand what it means to the organization, we can understand the risk behind it. Some of these things are going to be nice to have, sort of a high, medium, low is all that I think people truly need. You may have to go into more detail, but to understand what these are to the organization and what are the priorities, And you do that by building out the risks against them. What are the risks to the organization? Financial, operational. You'll get a bit of repetition here, but that's okay, because here's the thing. The business side cares about one thing, ROI. All right, you're up again. What's ROI mean? Not a chance. Who wants to take your spot? Who said that? Return on investment. I'll give whoever else it was the free pass, because not in this. ROI is important. I'm not going to say it's not, but this is about risk management more than anything. You look at, and when we get to the consumer side, it'll be a similar thing. ROI, well, this is risk management. Why? How do you quantify potential fines? So if you're GDPR, for example, what's that going to cost you at the end? There's numbers out there, but trying to quantify what's minor versus major, et cetera, it's a little hard in whether you're going to get hit. So for us, ROI, return on an investment, is still in there, but really, risk of incarceration. Let's think about that for a second. There's criminal and civil penalties to this. So if we're only looking at return on investment for this, you're not going to cover potentially all your use cases, needs, et cetera. Because you're not going to the model of risk of incarceration. What's it going to cost us in fines? Do I have to do the perp walk? Nobody wants to be the next guy on the news. No company, no person. And who gets the blame? Secret Service guy, the CISO. CISO, bad. He out. Next one in. Right? Similar thing. Who do you blame? A software vendor, it was their fault. Integrator, it was their fault. Same thing. CISO, his fault. Her fault. Their fault. All right. So, build out the risks. We've done a little bit of it. We're still in the assessment piece, right? We quantify what this is. Now we need requirements to mitigate that. Build requirements, good requirements. You don't need 1 million requirements. That's what the system side of things is for. But from a business requirements, you can build out a set of requirements. You don't need a ton. You just need them to be applicable. And I've seen bad requirements. I've seen requirements saying we need auto provisioning to go faster. That's not a requirement. That's a want. Requirement, we need auto provisioning to go from 4 days to 4 minutes, 4 hours, whatever. Something that's metricable. I don't even know if that's a word. Something from a metrics perspective that we can say if we got value at the end of the day. And again, some of that may be financial, some of it may be risk, some is operational, security, et cetera. So now that we've done that, we want to build an enterprise blueprint. We're fans of Visio in that, whatever you want to use in that regard. Here's what we say. Look, biggest mistake organizations make is they build this based on the 1 or 2 things that they think they need. They don't build it for the entire program. So you miss things. It comes to haunt you later. What we recommend is that you take the following, as you'll see it on the board, constraints off the table. You don't have enough time. You don't have enough money. You don't have enough resources. We know that, so pretend they don't exist for a few minutes. Build out what should this thing look like if we're going to cover all of these requirements, and those, we're talking our jellyfish items. Everything. The nice-to-haves, the must-haves, the somewhere in the middles. We'll get to the logical aspect of this after. Build out this reference architecture or sets of reference architectures if you need. Now you can do an actual gap analysis. Say, okay, well, what do we have today? Well, hopefully you figured that out through your issues. So you know what's out there, and now you know what the issues surround it. But so we can now say, okay, so we know that, be able to pull out the current state. Hopefully we get that from the current state perspective. We can pick individual functions. So let's go with the auto provisioning one, for example. So say auto provisioning, current state, here's what we have. Future state, where do we get that from? The reference architectures we just spoke about. If we do this, what are we getting requirements-wise? What requirements does it mitigate? And then those should hopefully map to your issues. So you get a full line of traceability. So you do auto provisioning, it takes care of these requirements. You can map it and say what you got at the end of the day. All right. We're 2/3 of the way there. We know the problems, we know the solutions, but now we got to put sanity back in. What's the sanity aspect of this? Well, we got to put time, money, and resource requirements back in. Or not requirements, I should say constraints. We put them back in. And now we can say, okay, let's talk about sanity. What can we do? And now we want to go from a priority perspective, what's important, when, why, and how, and build out a model. We recommend, when you're building this out, to take a bit of a phase 0 approach, which is similar to this, a getting your ducks in a row approach. And I'll get to that in a sec, actually. I want to take one step back first. We want to build a roadmap. And everyone will give you a roadmap that's a swim lane diagrammed out approach. We believe in no phase more than 6 months. Even if you had 3 years worth of auto provisioning tasks ahead of you, what can you show in production in 6 months? Okay? Phase 0 for us is typically 3 months or less. Sometimes it goes beyond that. We like to call this the cleanup phase. Are your processes, that A, B, C, D, this stuff that's out of order, and the asterisks, are those documented? Are they signed off on? That's the CYA piece I was referring to. Get this stuff down. If it's current state and it has gaps, get it down. Get people to sign off that that's how they're doing it today. They may not want to. Do a gapped version with the fixes. So here's what it's going to be in the future. Get sign off. Build appropriate use cases out of those and workflows. Here's the use case, the accompanying workflow. Why? Now when you get this stuff signed off, as we said, and hopefully your stakeholders are signing off, at the end of the day when you put a technology in, this is what you're mapping it to. Nobody should be saying, that's not what I wanted. Really? Because you signed right here. Because the engineers, if you leave it up to them to figure it out, hey, I'm the guy, I'm going to come in, I'm going to figure it out. You want X, so I'm just going to figure out a solution. Oh, and then I'm going to implement this solution. Maybe I'll document it, maybe I won't. Is not a sustainable approach. It puts you back into the broken process, not best bet for your functionality and all that fun stuff. And it's a people problem because that person walks out the door, so does that knowledge. All right. Speaking of walking out the door, no, I'm not going to pick on you at all. No, it's all good. I like the socks. See, he's going to come back. Another guy's going at the end, he's going to beat me up. All right. So he'll hold me, you hit me, you're golden. All right. So we keep this going. So we build out these phases. Every box, so to speak, every item within these swim laned out phases should be considered a project. Now, here's the rationale behind that. It may be something like fixing process, a little more grunt work. It may not be a dev to test to prod type deliverable model, which is fine. But you still want to build it out. You want to understand what goes into it. If it's fixing processes, you can build out a little project plan. It just doesn't do a dev test prod. Next up, 4-year projects. They may not fit 6 months. It may be a 2-month, a 1-month endeavor, a 3-month endeavor. That's fine. No phase, in our humble opinion, more than 6 months. Now, you may change this based on your own internal model. This is really just to make sure, at a minimum, you can show management that you're getting value. Why? Because here's the problem. If somebody came into your organization right now and said, for your auto provision, you got 3 years of them, hey, here's a 3-year project that I want you guys to fund, what happens? Guy's like, oh, I think that's a great idea. Hits the button, floor opens up, you're like, what? Right? You're down at your car with a box. We want to avoid that. All right, so you can fit this into your model. If your model is monthly releases, for example, if you're more of an agile model, if you're, whatever your model is, you can fit this in. A lot of these technologies, if it's brand new, net new, sometimes it is a couple of months to get that framework in, and then you can shift to that quicker release model once you've got the framework in. But build it, try not to go too long, because if you can't show value, you're not going to get value out of it. And your management's not going to get value out of it, and they're going to get mad at you. And you're going to blame your integrator. You're going to blame your software vendor. That's your fault. All right, now that you've done that, you can take these projects and say, okay, what are the constraints and dependencies? What are the resources required to get it done? I need a 20% PM, 25, 50, whatever the metric that you guys use is. I need a full-time or 2 engineers, a half-time architect, a tester, whatever those aspects are. I'm dying to know. You're going to have to tell me afterwards.
Just me.
Oh, just you. Yeah, that's what we're trying to avoid in this, but we can talk about that at the end as well. What are these resources required? We can base it off of history. I know in our case, we base it off of our own integration past and history. If you have it, use it. Why? Because now you can budget this thing out properly. You can say, hey, what am I using? Is all internal people? If so, what's the cost we associate with that? Do I have a mix of internal and external? Do I have only external? Whatever those are, internal, external costs. If I know I've got, for example, a 3-month project, let's go rule of thumb, a full-timer, let's say 500 hours. And that 500 hours, all those resources, you got a 10% PM because math is difficult sometimes. That's, what did I say, a 500-hour project? Did I mean 500? Yes, I did. Let's do it this way. Yeah, that works. Okay, so 10% is 50 hours. And it's $100 for that resource. That cost us $5,000 from a budget perspective for our project. That's a raw cost. If you want to add in a variable, which you should for phase gate review, steering committees, architectural review boards, all that stuff that we do, add a minimum 20%. For whatever reason in Canada, they always make us add 100%, but I never understood that to this day. But minimum 20% is good. You can figure out that overage number. You now have down to the penny what you need to go get from a budget perspective. And now that you've done this process, you know, hopefully, everything. Why are you doing it? What's the point? What are you getting at the end of the day? What's it going to look like? What's it going to cost? The last thing then you do is figure out who you want to talk to from a vendor perspective. Now, this is the fun part, because all of the times I say, don't buy their product, this is when I reverse course and say, now you do. And they're going to love you for it. I've never had an angry vendor over this, because now they know exactly what you need. You know what you need. And I'm not sitting here going, I'm going to sell you the whole suite of 6 things that you don't need. I'm going to sell you the 2 things you do that fit your use cases, your requirements. And then what? They see it as a win, because the other part of them selling it is they have to have success. If you don't have successful implementation, they look bad, it's bad for them, bad for business. This is why we actually get a lot of vendor support for this. And it doesn't take that long to do, hopefully. All right, we're almost there. So how do we maintain this maturity? So we are believers, as I'm sure some of you guys have seen in the old plan, build, run, plan, build, run, plan, build, run. Anyone here NYC, New Jersey person have been? All right, let's see if you guys remember this. There used to be a commercial, maybe it was the 80s, I'm going to show my age. It was an anti-drug commercial. And it was this guy, and he's like, man, I have to work harder. Is that how it started? Yeah, maybe. I have to work harder so I can make more money, so I could buy more cocaine, so I could work harder, so I can make more money, so I could buy more cocaine. And hopefully this is the only reference you have to drugs in this entire thing. However, this little circle always reminds me of plan, build, run, plan, build, run, plan, build, run. So that's how I remember it. The only missing component usually is governance. That poor drug guy, what was his governance model? Somebody saying, dude, slow down, you know. If you do not have good communications, if you do not run governance, meaning next thing's coming up, do we have people actually looking at this? Do we have a governance type, maybe even a governance review board, if you would, in order to understand here's the changes coming in, here's the requests, do we do it now, do we do it later? What ends up happening is Nick over here, somebody taps him on the shoulder, says, Nick, here's what I need, and he goes and he plans it and he builds it and he runs with it. And if we're lucky, you have a second in the day to document it. There's no real governance around that. We're beholden to Nick in that regard, which is good until you win Mega Millions. Notice I try to go positive on that side? All right, so governance is a big aspect. That may be from a steering committee side, upper management, that it includes really, to me, more than anything, the communication process. Do operations know what's coming out? Are we letting them know? Do we have a good communication process in this? Do we have training coming in for the folks who are doing this? Are they going to be ready to go from that side? Management, do they understand what's coming next? Do other tech groups understand? Because there's a code freeze on this thing, which means all of a sudden our project went off the rails by 2 months because they froze. And we integrate with them. All of the different aspects of things that have to also be included. Governance is one aspect in the truest sense of, hey, understanding what's coming in, what are the costs, what are the outputs, the needs, it's all that fun stuff, but also communicate, because your governance also goes off the rails if you don't do a proper communication process. I've gone to organizations who do something like this from a project perspective, but they don't communicate. So here's what happens. I'm going to go to the next one because that's where this thing comes in. They don't communicate. They don't do this. And here's the fun part. So Nate's project goes off without a hitch. And it's part of an overall program that reports to Sean, and all his stuff goes off without a hitch. And that's awesome. They go to get year 2 budget. Sorry, no, there's no money for your next phase. But we were super successful. All the stuff's laid out. They never let them know from that management, that steering, that higher level perspective what was going on. And guess what? Steve over here, his project failed miserably, but he had great communications. So he puts in for year 2 budget and he got the money. And I want to now kill Steve for that. I'm like, how did you do that? But it's not his fault, it's my fault. I'm not a fan of, it's your fault, it's your fault. That was my own fault. If I am the guy who runs that other one, I should have been the Sean in that one, not Sean. Not Steve's. Steve was smart. He failed miserably and still got more money for it. You gotta love it. So see that with some of the athletes. They're doing this. I'm a big Yankee fan, and I'm sorry for anybody who doesn't like the New York Yankees, but they always had a habit of paying the older players who are on the downslope, which always was horrible. They pay for past stuff. And then they pay an arm and a leg, and they don't get the value of it. Well, similar thing. We're paying him an arm and a leg. We didn't get the value of it. But good communicator, so we paid too much. All right, so that was a mouthful. I know, wow, I probably could have done even better. There's about 8.5 minutes left. So I'm going to do this now so I don't forget. This is the shameless self-promotion, but I'm going to keep it under a minute as well. So when you want a copy of this, it's at the bottom, todd@idmworks.com. Yeah, you can take a picture of that one. I have business cards as well. You can shoot me a message. Again, it's probably not going to go out until end of the weekend because we're here at this thing, but you can have copies of this, and I'll send you copies of some of our other materials as well, and we'll send you the good copies, so to speak. So there's a little extra to them, so there's some value in it because otherwise you can stick with the PDFs here. But we've got a couple extra pieces for you. All right, that's one. Number 2, because somebody's always going to ask the question, and this is the true promotion side here. Yes, we do this. You don't have to. If you do it and know how to do it, that's the whole point of this discussion. I'm not here to sell you on us. The only thing I'm telling you is if you don't, feel free to reach out. And that's as much of the promotion that I want to go into, and I want to open this up to questions. Do we have any questions? Hopefully I didn't bore you too much here.
Hey, Todd, what tool do you guys use to identify segregation of duties?
Yes. So the question was, what tool do you use to identify segregation of duties? There's a lot of tools out there. Here's the thing. When we talk about vendors and where vendors come in the mix, we want to do that at the end. I'm actually glad you brought that up. It's probably something I should have gone into more detail on. You get the gold star today there, Ralph. When we want to talk vendors, what fits, and we have hopefully kept this vendor neutral because you want to call provisioning, you want to call federation, CASB. Don't plug in a vendor unless it's your vendor already. You already have that vendor. At the end, now you can make a list of what are the vendors that fit, what are the pros and cons, and here's the rest of the vendors, why don't they fit? So you can make a rational decision. The reason I said yes was it depends. It depends on your need. You just say segregation of duties isn't enough, right? What are your requirements? What are your needs? There may be multiple vendors. There may be 2, 3, 4, 5 that fit. Here's the pros, cons. What makes the most sense is the financial aspect a piece of it. What can you get away with, etc. Or it may turn out to be one vendor. There are some areas where at the end of the day, one vendor is the only one that can manage all the use cases, potentially. That's why I don't want to speak to a specific vendor. Maybe multiple vendors. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir.
For the assessment part of this, what type of resource skills are you usually say need to be part of that process? Specific like roles that are part of that assessment process?
Well, if it's specific to identity and access management, it's specifically IAM resources, and I'll go into that in a second. But here's the fun part. When you think about it, this applies to anything, right? Anything, talk big data, talk about really anything in the IT spectrum. This process is not that different, right? For us, obviously, we're specifically speaking about IGA, IAM, and for that, it gets tricky. I say it gets tricky because you do want architect level within it, but architect's always a tough one because a lot of the architects, before I say this, how many architects we got in the room? Oh, God, you guys are going to get mad at me in about 2 seconds. I blame you for this. So here's the headache with architects. If you guys are great at getting in front of the board and putting stuff down, but you can't get it on paper and then drive it, you're missing something. Don't be an architect, guys. Be a tech lead. And what I mean is this. If I can architect this thing out, and I can put it down on paper, simply handing it off is not going to get it done. Because project managers, they don't know that level of the tech. Your engineers, they know their version, so they're going to go with what they know. You need to be a tech lead, which means I don't just architect it. I'm part of this project to make sure it gets done. I should be neck and neck with the PM to make sure that I know when to call shenanigans, when to not, when to be forward thinking enough to say, oh, these guys are going to have a code freeze, or they're using something different that nobody realized, and be able to be proactive. Now, where I'm coming for this, that's a good resource for that. You're going to need typically someone in the know of IAM, but can be a little more on the analyst side, because you need somebody with the ability to write. That's the other headache. You bring in an engineer, a lot of them are great on the tech, wait till you try to get them to put something down on paper. You know, there's nothing worse than getting a document in and the document says, so I was thinking we should look at vendor X's technology. And you're like, that's your design doc? So you need a good writer in there. I would say somewhere in the middle of that is another potential role. Call it the SME/engineer, somebody who's had their hands dirty before, because your lead position should be able to help navigate this. That person hopefully can take some of that weight off, and then your analyst to make sure that this is getting captured correctly and translated correctly, at a minimum. Some places that's 2 people, some it's 3, some it's an army, just depends on the org. When we do it, it's typically about 3 people. And then if we need to pull other people in, we pull them in as need be. All right? The other thing is don't architect on the fly. Too many orgs, they get into this, and they start architecting before they understand what those issues are. Do it in a process that makes sense. Understand the issues, the wants, the gaps, needs, the risks, and then the requirements. Until you have that, don't architect a solution, because you end up in the same problem where we buy a vendor too quick. We buy a solution that doesn't fit. All right. And again, that person needs to be able to take it forward to implementation. Any other questions? We still got 2.5 minutes. Yes, sir.
How much time would you calculate for the 3 stages?
Oh, boy. That depends. When we do it, minus review, because review can get kind of long in the tooth with getting people together, et cetera. Average for us is 2 weeks on the ground. Sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little less. Size of the organization, number of systems, all these things come into play. If it's a smaller org, it could be as little as a week at most, and others it can be 3-4 weeks. Really just comes down to the breadth. You know, big multinational, and you know we've got 800 systems, and all of the, you start adding in that, and it goes a little longer, right? From there, you have to figure out how long it's going to take you to write this stuff, you know, to put these materials together. I know for us, it's probably about a 3-week process. Sometimes it goes 4 weeks, because we've done it 800 times, so we kind of got it down to a science in that regard, but can't assume that. The kicker, too, is reviews in between, because you want to keep adjusting this so everybody's happy at the end of the day. And it takes time. It does take time. The shortest I typically see it has been about 6 weeks. Average is probably 8 to 10. But with some organizations, it can go many months because of review cycles, getting it to exactly where you need to be. So there's a lot of factors in there, yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You talked about how to drive the projects and program after the assessment.
Yeah.
Any recommendations for how to get buy-in on doing the assessment to begin with, whether it's internal or external?
Yes. All right. Next, no, I'm just kidding. Yes, so a lot of it is this. When you're in the role where you have to build out the business case to go get the money for it, that's sometimes difficult if that's not your big daily job, right? So like, for example, if you had me do this for big data, I'm lost. I don't do big data. It's not within my wheelhouse. So when you use an organization such as ours, or if you find somebody to do it, however that is, or if you know the information behind it, you run with that. And what the goal is to say, hey, here's what it costs if it's an external organization, or if you're going to do it, here's what I need based on, again, some of the factors we said. If it's 2 weeks you think to pull the information together, another, say, 4 weeks to build it, you can figure out what the cost is. As for the value, take a copy of this presentation. Seriously, sometimes that opens it up. Different orgs have different backing and rationale for it. The consumer side, which we're going to do in 10 minutes, most of that is coming because of regulation. So they don't have a lot of choice. With the enterprise side, sometimes you have to make the case. And this is part of the process to make the case and say, hey, this doesn't cost as much as a lot of stuff that's out there. We want to take it and use it to build out everything, all the rationale behind it, to plan our next X number of years, to show what that value will be, what you're going to get out of it at the end of the day, why we're going to do it. The two versions of ROI. Some orgs need return on investment. Others need to have the crap scared out of them. And that's the risk of incarceration. So there's a couple different ways to approach that. There's another session, by the way, that this guy over here is doing, Sean, later in the day, which speaks to how to do the get the buy-in piece. It's at 5 o'clock, IAM to the power of N. No, that's the wrong one. It's at 5:35. No, it's at, there it is, 4:25. Communicate IAM program value at the board level to get the funding you need. It's kind of like style, we knew that. All right, looks like we're at the end. If I missed a question, you can come on up. You're also happy to get a business card if you want. Thank you.